is the shocking announcement that after a 50-year run, the agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia to export oil exclusively in U.S. dollars has officially ended on June 9th, 2024. And guess what? The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has decided to not renew its partnership with the U.S. and instead will open up the Saudis' lucrative oil trade to other countries and currencies. Trust me, this is a massive blow to the status of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. For the past 50 years, the U.S. government has mandated that oil must be sold exclusively in U.S. dollars, elevating the dollar status as the world's reserve currency. It was honestly one of the most lucrative decisions the U.S. government has ever made. But a world in where America is the sole superpower is officially over. Earlier this week, Reuters reported that Saudi Arabia has now joined a China-led central bank digital currency project in what could be another step towards less of the world's oil trade being done in U.S. dollars. Last week, U.S. Congressman Thomas Macy made an appearance on Tucker Carlson's podcast and gave one of the most authentic breakdowns of what's happening with the U.S. dollar. Trust me, there are very few politicians in Washington who are actually worth listening to, but Congressman Macy doesn't sugarcoat what is really happening.
And we can do that as long as they use our currency, but I think it's going to end. At some point, they're going to quit using our dollars as reserve currency. I mean, I watched your interview with Putin. One of the things he said that is true is when we sanctioned him, before we sanctioned Russia, 70% of their transactions were in U.S. dollars. And after the sanctions, it's less than 20% of their transactions are in U.S. dollars.
Ironically, every time the U.S. government introduces a new economic sanction, it moves the world one step closer to de-dollarization. To be honest, the exact same thing is happening with the U.S. government's microchip battle against China. The U.S. doesn't want China to have access to America's best microchips, so in turn, they sanction China. Well, what does China do as a result? They invest in their domestic microchip industry, and within a few years are quickly closing the innovation gap. The best thing to ever happen to the Chinese semiconductor industry was getting sanctioned by the U.S. government. This forced China to change and get stronger. If the U.S. government continues to weaponize the U.S. dollar and enforce sanctions, it opens the door for much larger problems.
And we're also sending a really clear signal, which is the dollar's not safe for you.
Right.
It's the reserve currency because it's a safe haven, because it's a stable country. It's the most stable country in the world, and we're not going to weaponize the dollar because that would be shooting ourselves. But suddenly we are.
Of course, we can see this unfolding in real time as well. Earlier this week, Joe Biden and French President Macron reached an agreement to use the profits of frozen Russian assets to send additional funding to Ukraine. This is a dangerous move from the U.S. and French governments because it not only violates international law, but it exposes how much at odds Western leaders are with their populations on Ukraine. Last week, the Institute of Global Affairs published this groundbreaking study which reveals 94% of Americans and 88% of Western Europeans believe that NATO member countries should push for a negotiated settlement for the war in Ukraine. Literally 9 out of 10 citizens in both Western Europe and the U.S. want this war in Ukraine to end. But our democratically elected officials, who are supposed to represent the people they serve, have other plans. Once again, this strategy will be a disaster for Western governments over the long term.
But one of the things we recently did in Congress, we passed something called the Repo Act, where we said we're just going to seize all of Russia's sovereign assets in the United States. Well, it turns out a lot of that is treasury debt that they've agreed to buy so that they can hold dollars. When people see that we've seized their money that they gave us in exchange for these treasury notes, then other countries won't want to buy our debt.
As I mentioned before, the U.S. government has weaponized the dollar to the point where other countries are watching and are concerned about the long-term effects of holding too much dollars. One of those countries is, of course, China, who was once the largest holder of U.S. Treasury bonds. At its peak, China held over $1 trillion worth of Treasury bonds, but after the U.S. launched a trade war against China, China has shifted their strategy. They no longer want to hold excessive amounts of U.S. Treasury debt and are now offloading these debts in exchange for gold. China is not stupid, and it knows it could be a future victim of U.S. sanctions itself.
You know, we probably wouldn't seize Great Britain's assets, but I could see us seizing China's assets.
That seems like theft. Just like take a country's assets. I mean, that belongs to the people of the country, right? It's not just Putin.
It is theft. Like, it's immoral, but even if you're okay with the amorality or immorality of it, it's short-sighted because eventually it'll catch up with us.
What if you could use retirement accounts to invest in crypto? With iTrust Capital, you can. iTrust Capital allows you to invest in your favorite crypto assets 24/7 with the tax benefits of an IRA. So instead of paying taxes on your crypto gains every year, you can defer taxes till you retire using an iTrust IRA. Or with an iTrust Roth IRA, you can withdraw tax-free at retirement because you're in this for the long haul. Start investing today at iTrustCapital.com.
Still talking about last night's good moments? Or are you out getting your free Hardee's chicken tenders? Hands were high-fived, fans cheered. Those are tender moments. And that means 3 hand-breaded chicken tenders free today if you download the Hardee's app and join My Rewards.
As you can see, this interview with Congressman Macy exposes a lot of truth, and it's why the other leading headline that BRICS is launching its own payment system was also significant this week. Here is a clip of Vladimir Putin speaking at the 2024 St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, which was held in Russia just last week. Pay attention to these words as he reveals the future of global trade.
По 23 год доля рубля в расчетах за российский экспорт выросла почти в 3 раза, до 39%. В 3 раза. Вместе с зарубежными партнерами будем наращивать применение национальных валют во внешнеторговых расчетах, повышать безопасность и эффективность таких операций. В том числе по линии БРИКС прорабатывается формирование независимой платежной системы, не подверженной политическому давлению, злоупотреблениями и внешнему санкционному вмешательству.
Now, if you listen exclusively to Western media, you probably will believe that Russia has been cut off from the outside world and that their economy is finished. But over 17,000 participants from over 130 countries attended this economic forum in Russia as Putin laid out the future of the BRICS plan for global trade. Remarkably, just a few days after this economic summit, Russia held another meeting which brought together the foreign ministers of each BRICS nation to outline the future goals of the organization. In total, there were 54 points addressed during this meeting, and I've read the entire report, so you don't have to. Here are the top 3 most important takeaways. Number 1, a new financial system. The BRICS organization wants to reform the entire global financial system to enhance the voice of developing nations and improve their access to international financial institutions. Under the current US dollar system, every country is under the mercy of the US government, and this remains the biggest motivation for BRICS. Create an independent payment system that uses local currencies in trade and one that is free from U.S. sanctions and outside political pressure. Number 2, Israel-Palestine. I want you to look at this map which shows the countries who recognize Palestinian statehood. Around 88% of the world's population lives inside these green countries, and this map is almost identical to the countries who also support de-dollarization and the rise of BRICS. The war in Gaza has become the latest political issue separating BRICS and the United States. The U.S. will of course always support Israel, and quite frankly has proved useless in ending the war in Gaza. But the BRICS alliance will fight back and pursue a path of statehood for Palestine, something that once again 88% of the world's population wants to see. And number 3, the end of U.S. sanctions. Now, the BRICS foreign ministers didn't specifically name the United States, but this point leaves no doubt as to who they were referring to. The ministers expressed concern about the use of unilateral coercive measures, which are incompatible with the principles of the Charter of the UN and produce negative effects on economic growth, trade, energy, health, and food security, notably in the developing world. What I want everyone to realize is that once you remove yourself from the Western media bubble and start to observe global trends, you'll notice the majority of the world are united in what they want. They want economic freedom, and this is why a shift away from the US dollar has begun. They want equal treatment, and this is why 88% of the world once again supports Palestinian statehood. Finally, they want a multipolar world where countries can do business and transact with as many nations as possible. Once again, this is why Saudi Arabia, who is also considering a full BRICS membership later this year, is opening up their oil trade to more countries and currencies around the world. But as you can see with